Chapter 1. A crystal goblet shattered against the sacred marble floor. The sharp, metallic tang of my own blood instantly coated my tongue. I had spent 20 years folding myself into invisible spaces, praying that if I remained small enough, the Pantheon might eventually forgive my tainted half-blood existence. I was wrong. As the glacial wind whipped across my bruised skin, the brutal truth finally took root in my chest. You cannot beg for mercy from creatures who actively feed on your humiliation. Theron, the god-wolf of light, took a deliberate step backward. His golden armor blinded the eye. He raised a perfectly manicured finger, wiping a single drop of my blood from his sculpted jaw. The skin beneath remained flawless and entirely unmarked. He had publicly refused the ceremonial bite. The mating ritual was dead. A melodic, vicious laugh slithered from the shadow of the colossal pillars. Phaedra. The nine-tailed illusionist stepped into the harsh sunlight. She moved with a predatory, languid grace, walking directly into Theron's open arms. He embraced her without a fraction of hesitation, burying his face in her fiery crimson hair. Thousands of deities and high-ranking wolves watched from the amphitheater below. Their collective stare was a suffocating, crushing weight against my skull. "Look at her," Vander purred. Her voice, amplified by cruel magic, carried to the furthest rows. "A defective breed, a permanent stain on this holy ground." Theron's eyes flared with golden malice. "She is unworthy of the light. Toss her to the void. Let the sacrificial pit consume her taint." Two armored guards stepped forward, their spears lowered. I backed away until my toes grazed the edge of the endless, swirling abyss below the temple. The wind shrieked in my ears. My pulse hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. I closed my eyes. Then, the heavens tore open. It was not a storm. The very fabric of reality simply ripped apart. A jagged fissure of pure, suffocating darkness split the golden clouds. Black lightning violently struck the altar. The explosive shockwave threw the advancing guards off their feet. An overwhelming scent flooded the arena. Wild snow pine, wet, freshly turned earth, raw, crackling ozone. It completely obliterated the cloying, sweet incense of the gods. The hidden wolf deep inside my soul whined, not in fear, but in absolute, instinctual submission. Out of the swirling black smoke stepped a living nightmare. Vander, the Dark Lycan King of the Abyss. He was the ancient sworn enemy of the Pantheon. He wore armor of blackened steel over a towering, imposing frame. A cloak woven from actual shadows billowed behind him. His presence carried an absolute, oppressive gravity. The ambient temperature plummeted. Every god and wolf in the arena froze in pure, unadulterated terror. He did not merely walk. He conquered the space with every single stride. Theron snarled, his fangs descending. "How dare you defile this?" Vander moved faster than a blink. He crossed the altar in a blur of terrifying speed. His large, leather-clad hand clamped around Theron's throat. He lifted the golden god off the ground like a helpless newborn pup. Phaedra shrieked and lunged, her magic flaring to life. Vander did not even grant her a glance. A negligent flick of his wrist sent a shockwave of dark energy outward. Phaedra was hurled backward, crumpling against a stone column with a deafening crack. Vander tossed Theron aside. The god-wolf crashed into the sacrificial braziers, raining sparks over the pristine marble. Then, the Dark King turned his gaze to me. His eyes were bottomless obsidian, ringed with a terrifying feral crimson light. The alpha aura radiating from him was intensely physical. It pressed hotly against my freezing skin. I should have run. I should have thrown myself into the void, yet I was rooted to the spot. As he closed the distance between us, the glacial ice in my veins rapidly thawed. He stopped mere inches away. His jaw was clenched so tight, the muscle jumped beneath his scarred skin. He looked down at my fragile, trembling form. Without uttering a single word, he drew a silver dagger from his belt. He sliced the blade deeply across his own palm. Thick, dark blood welled to the surface, thrumming with ancient, potent magic. He cupped the back of my neck with his clean hand. His long fingers were surprisingly warm, sending a jolt of pure electricity straight down my spine. He pressed his bleeding palm against my lips. "Drink," he commanded. The word was a low, gravelly vibration. It bypassed my ears and echoed directly inside my mind. I opened my mouth. His blood touched my tongue. It tasted of fire and raw, untamed power. As I swallowed, a searing heat erupted in my chest, binding our souls with an invisible, unbreakable chain. Vander turned his broad shoulders to face the stunned Pantheon. "She is no longer your trash," he roared. His voice shattered the remaining crystal goblets on the altar. "From this very second, she is the Blood Queen of the Abyss. Thank you for stepping into the shadows with us." If you felt the undeniable, dangerous pull between Vander and Calliope, make sure to surrender to the Velmora obsession. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of their dark romance. The carriage ride into the abyss is about to begin. Stay tuned for the next chapter. Chapter 2. The obsidian carriage lurched into the freezing sky. I was thrown forward instantly. Hard, blackened steel caught my fall. Unrelenting hands gripped my waist. They steadied me before I could strike the floorboards. The sudden contact sent a sharp, electric jolt straight through my nervous system. "Careful," Vander murmured. His voice was a profound, gravelly vibration. It settled deep into the marrow of my bones. He released me the second I found my footing. He sank back into the plush, dark velvet bench opposite mine. The spectral steeds dragged our transport further from the Pantheon. They tore a path through the howling winds of the upper atmosphere. The cabin was suffocatingly intimate. It was designed for a solitary king, not a king, and his stolen bride. Vander's imposing frame consumed the available space. His long, muscular legs nearly brushed against my bruised knees. I pressed my spine into the corner of the carriage. I shivered uncontrollably. My torn silken gown offered absolutely no defense against the glacial altitude. He noticed the tremor. A tense muscle feathered along his sharp jawline. "Hold still," he commanded. The ice in his tone had melted. It was a firm directive, not a threat. He leaned forward. He wrapped his calloused fingers around my injured ankle. I flinched on instinct. He did not tighten his grip. Blistering heat radiated from his palm. It seeped directly into my frozen skin. Dark, soothing magic flowed from his touch, rapidly knitting the damaged tissue together. He refused to look at my face. He kept his obsidian eyes locked on my bare foot. The scent of wild snow pine and crackling ozone was intoxicating. It completely crowded out the lingering stench of the Pantheon's incense. Look at the terrifying beast playing nursemaid. A sharp, clicking sound shattered the tense silence. I gasped, jerking my leg back. Perched on the brass window railing sat a bizarre creature. It was a raven, but it possessed the sleek, predatory shoulders of a wolf. 3 gleaming amber eyes blinked back at me. "Silence, Barnaby," Vander growled. The air pressure in the cabin dropped like a stone. Barnaby clicked his beak. He was completely unfazed by the lethal alpha aura. "I am merely stating facts, your brutality. You spent a century staring into that scrying orb. You practically drooled over this little bird. Now you finally steal her, and you refuse to meet her gaze. It is pathetic. My breath hitched in my throat. A century? A scrying orb. A dark flush crept up Vander's thick neck. It was a jarring contrast to his ruthless reputation. He lunged forward. His hand snapped toward the bird with lethal speed. Barnaby squawked. He fluttered upward, dropping a stolen golden coin onto the floorboards. "You watched me?" My voice was barely a whisper. Vander's hand dropped slowly to his side. His gaze finally met mine. The feral crimson rings around his pupils flared with raw, suppressed emotion. The beast speaks lies to entertain his own madness. You are a weapon against Theron, nothing more. His words were crafted from solid ice, but his thumb, still resting just above my ankle, betrayed his lie. It stroked a slow, unconscious circle against my bare skin. The friction sent a wicked surge of heat straight to my core. The sexual tension between us was a living, breathing entity. It coiled tight around my lungs. Why would the most feared creature in the realms risk a holy war for a broken half-blood? I opened my mouth to demand the truth. Then, the carriage roof screamed. Reinforced metal peeled back with a deafening screech. The freezing wind blasted into the cabin. 3 figures dropped through the jagged hole. They were Theron's elite wolf assassins. Their silver blades gleamed with a sickly, glowing green venom. "Protect her," Vander roared. The confined space erupted into pure chaos. Barnaby transformed into a flurry of razor-sharp feathers and snapping fangs. He blinded the nearest attacker. Vander moved with devastating brutality. He caught the second assassin by the throat. He crushed the windpipe with a single, sickening snap. He hurled the lifeless body out into the endless night. But the third assassin ignored the Dark King. He raised a specialized hand-held crossbow. The poisoned bolt was aimed directly at my chest. The trigger snapped. No! Vander did not hesitate. He did not summon his dark magic. He used his own body. He twisted with blinding speed, throwing his vast bulk over me. He pinned me flat against the velvet seat. He buried my face in the hollow of his shoulder to shield me from the splintering wood. The violent impact of the bolt shuddered through his entire frame. A deafening feral roar of pure agony ripped from his throat. The assassin scrambled backward. He dove out of the moving carriage to escape the beast's wrath. Vander's oppressive aura flickered wildly. Then it died completely. His leaden weight collapsed onto my chest, driving the breath from my lungs. I touched his back in blind panic. My trembling fingers came away, slick, warm, and coated in glowing green venom. He closed his eyes. The Dark King stopped moving entirely. Chapter 3. The spectral steed slammed to a halt. The iron gates of the abyssal fortress shrieked in protest. They scraped against the ancient stone courtyard like tortured souls. Thick, unnatural fog instantly swallowed the carriage. I stumbled out into the freezing mist. My hands were slick with Vander's poisoned blood. "Guards! Fetch the healers!" Barnaby shrieked from the carriage roof. The mocking observer was gone. The raven wolf circled frantically, his 3 amber eyes glowing with genuine panic. A dozen Lycan warriors poured from the obsidian shadows. Their eyes widened in pure terror at the sight of their invincible king slumped across the velvet seats. They hauled his immense, leaden weight out of the cabin. I followed close behind, my bare feet bled against the jagged, frost-covered cobblestones. We rushed through winding, torch-lit corridors until we reached the royal bedchamber. They dropped him onto a colossal 4-poster bed. "Leave us," I ordered. The command ripped from my throat. It surprised even me with its sudden absolute authority. The warriors hesitated. They cast nervous glances between my fragile frame and their dying alpha. "Out!" Barnaby squawked, diving aggressively at their heads. "Do as the Queen says." The thick oak door slammed shut. We were entirely alone. I scrambled onto the mattress. The glowing green toxin was rapidly turning the veins in his thick neck, a sickening, pitch-black hue. I grasped the slick wooden shaft of the crossbow bolt. I had to get it out. I drew a sharp, trembling breath, planted my hands against his hardened chest, and yanked. The bolt came free with a wet squelch. Dark blood spurted from his shoulder. I pressed both hands tightly over the wound. I desperately tried to summon the suppressed divine light buried inside me. I needed to heal him. He had taken this lethal strike for a broken, defective half-blood. Suddenly the mattress violently shifted. Large hands clamped around my wrists like iron shackles. I gasped as the entire room spun. In a fraction of a second, I was pinned flat on my back. Vander loomed over me. His chest heaved with brutal, frantic breaths. The blackened veins pulsed fiercely against his throat. But it was his eyes that froze the blood in my veins. The obsidian depths were completely gone. They burned a glowing feral red. The neurotoxin had bypassed his logic. It had stripped away the stoic, calculating king, leaving only the primal, unrestrained alpha. A guttural snarl vibrated in his chest. The sound was so deep it rattled my teeth. His muscular thighs locked around my hips, rendering me completely immobile. He leaned down. His fangs were fully descended, dripping with venom-laced saliva. He was going to tear out my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut. My heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. I waited for the fatal bite. It never came. Instead, a rough, blistering exhale hit my collarbone. The feral alpha did not bite. He buried his face in the crook of my neck. He inhaled deeply, drawing my scent straight into his lungs. A soft, broken groan vibrated against my skin. The toxic haze demanded violence, but his soul demanded comfort. His iron grip on my wrist slowly loosened. It melted into a desperate, clinging hold. The terrifying beast of the abyss simply curled into my embrace like a wounded animal. Cautiously, I freed my hands. I wrapped my arms around his broad, trembling shoulders. I stroked his dark, silken hair. The sheer heat radiating from his skin slowly cooled. His breathing evened out. He slipped into a deep, healing slumber. When dawn broke, the fog outside the arched windows turned a bruised, melancholic gray. I woke up alone in the center of the bed. I sat up quickly, pulling the dark silk sheets tightly to my chest. Vander stood by the balcony. He was fully dressed in fresh, dark leather. The wound on his shoulder was completely gone, erased by his rapid cellular regeneration. He stared out into the mist. His broad back was completely rigid. "I apologize for my feral state," he said gruffly. The icy detachment had returned to his voice. He refused to turn around. "You did not hurt me," I replied softly. He finally faced me. His expression was a flawless mask of carved stone. "Theron is rallying the entire Pantheon. He sent word through the realms. He claims I kidnapped you to drain your divine blood. He will use this abduction as an excuse to eradicate my kind." Panic flared sharp and hot in my chest. "Then let me go back. I can tell them the truth." No. The word was absolute. It brokered zero argument. He stepped closer. His intense gaze locked onto mine. "They will execute you the moment you step foot on holy ground. There is only one way to stop a holy war, a sacred law even the supreme gods cannot defy." He paused. A tense muscle feathered in his jaw. "The law of the fated mate." I stopped breathing. "We must convince the supreme divine court that we are destined," Vander continued. His voice dropped an entire octave. A fake mating. You play the part of my devoted queen. In return, I will shield you from Theron's wrath. For eternity. The magnetic pull between us flared. It was sharp and undeniable. I craved his warmth. I desired the terrifying safety of his shadow. I slowly nodded. I accept the deal. Before he could respond, a blinding, searing flash of white light erupted in the center of the room. The ambient temperature plummeted to freezing. A scroll made of floating blood-red runes materialized in the air. Barnaby fluttered frantically through the open window, crashing into a stone pillar in his haste. "The court," the raven shrieked. "The Supreme Court has answered." Vander read the floating runes. All the color drained from his face. His obsidian eyes darkened with pure, unadulterated dread. "They demand proof," Vander whispered, staring at the magical decree. "We are summoned to the death arena to face the soul trial if we fail to prove our bond." He looked at me, his fists clenching tightly at his sides. "They will burn you alive." Haparter 4. The death arena was a colossal monument of carved obsidian and bleached bone. Tens of thousands of spectators filled the towering stands. Their collective roar was a physical force. It vibrated directly through the soles of my bare feet. Up on the grand balcony, Theron lounged on a gilded throne. A cruel, arrogant smirk twisted his handsome features. Phaedra sat beside him. Her 9 crimson tails swished slowly, a picture of calm, calculating anticipation. I stood in the center of the unforgiving white sand. I gripped Vander's hand. His hold was firm, an anchor in the storm. He wore no armor today, only a dark silk shirt unbuttoned at the collar. It exposed the scarred, imposing planes of his chest. "Do not look at them," Vander murmured. His lips brushed the shell of my ear. A violent tremor cascaded down my spine. "Look only at me." The Supreme Judge, an entity woven from blinding light, slammed his staff into the arena floor. The sound echoed like thunder. "The first trial of intimacy," the judge declared. "The dance of shadows." A haunting, rhythmic melody began to pulse through the air. The source of the music was unseen, but it beat like a second heart. Vander pulled me flush against his towering frame. There was absolutely no space between us. I felt every rigid muscle, every sharp, measured intake of his breath. We moved across the sand. It was a sensual, agonizingly slow waltz. My fingers tangled in his dark, silken hair. His calloused hand rested low on my spine. The fabricated intimacy rapidly dissolved into something terrifyingly real. My core throbbed with a deep, relentless ache. I was acutely aware of his wild scent, the sheer heat radiating from his skin, the possessive hunger burning in his obsidian eyes. "You are shaking, Tsaosa," he whispered. He spun me out and pulled me back into his chest in a seamless, fluid motion. "I am terrified," I admitted. I gazed up into his eyes, entirely captivated. "I will not let you fall." The vow was permanently etched into his gravelly voice. The haunting music swelled to a dramatic, breathless climax. The judge's voice boomed again. "The seal of breath." Vander's eyes darkened instantly. The feral red rings around his pupils expanded. This was the second test, a public display of absolute devotion. He framed my face with his large, calloused hands. I stared into those bottomless depths, my pulse racing. If this is a lie, why does it feel like the only truth I've ever known? I held my breath. He leaned down, capturing my mouth. The precise moment our lips collided, a violent spark ignited in my blood. He kissed me with a crushing, desperate intensity. His tongue parted my lips. tasting, claiming, exploring every inch of my mouth. I melted against him entirely. My hands gripped his broad shoulders just to keep my balance. A soft, involuntary whimper escaped my throat. He swallowed the sound, pulling me tighter against his hardened body. His possession was absolute, undeniable, and entirely intoxicating. The Colosseum fell dead silent. Even the arrogant gods could not deny the visceral, raw passion radiating from the arena floor. When he finally broke the kiss, our chests rose and fell in unison. He stared down at me. The mask of the stoic Dark King was entirely gone. Theron's furious roar shattered the silence. He gripped the marble railing of the balcony. His knuckles turned stark white. "Enough tricks," Theron bellowed, his voice laced with divine magic. "Bring forth the final trial, the flame of truth." A colossal iron brazier rose from the center of the arena. Inside it, a brilliant pure white fire danced peacefully. Legend claimed it would only burn those who harbored deceit in their hearts. Vander squeezed my hand. "Walk through it. Have no fear, Calliope. Our bond, fake or not, is forged in my absolute truth." I looked at him. A sliver of cold doubt pierced my chest. Was this his grand design? A Dark King did not save defective half-bloods out of pity. Perhaps he needed me to burn. Perhaps my ashes were the final ingredient for his impending war. I stepped away from the protective heat of his shadow. My mind spun with dark suspicions. I approached the glowing white fire. I closed my eyes and stepped directly into the flames. Instantly, the white light vanished. The peaceful fire erupted into a sickening pitch-black inferno. The heat was not a holy purification. It was a vile, flesh-rending agony. My knees buckled instantly. I collapsed onto the burning sand. He lied. My mind screamed through the blinding pain. He brought me here to die. The Dark King had simply delivered me to a different executioner. The ultimate betrayal tasted like ash on my tongue. I screamed until my vocal cords tore. Up on the balcony, Phaedra merely adjusted her silk sleeves. She hadn't cast a spell in the open. She had woven a dormant curse into the arena's foundation hours ago. A quiet, brilliant sabotage that no god could detect. "She burns!" Theron laughed maniacally. "She is a liar, a fraud. Let the fire consume the trash." Chapter 5. No. The roar tore from Vander's throat. It was not a sound meant for human ears. It was the agonizing, devastating sound of a soul fracturing. He did not hesitate. He broke every sacred law of the Pantheon in a single violent bound. He threw his towering frame directly into the cursed black flames. Dark magic seared his flesh the instant he crossed the threshold. He ignored the blistering heat. He wrapped his powerful arms around me, dragging my writhing body flush against his broad chest, a living shield. "Calliope, look at me," he pleaded. His gravelly voice cracked. It was laced with pure, unadulterated terror. I looked up at his blistering face. My mind was tearing apart. Through the agony, fragmented visions bled into my consciousness. Memories of a towering shadow hunting me across centuries. I had always believed he was the monster chasing me down. I thought he was the cruel architect of my endless nightmares. The guilt of my blind hatred choked me, but the cursed fire burned deeper. It bypassed my human flesh entirely. It struck the ancient ironclad seal locked within my soul, incinerating the lie. The full truth crashed into me. I smelled the metallic tang of golden blood spilled across a ruined battlefield. I felt the phantom weight of colossal wings. Wings woven from crackling crimson energy, tearing through the skin of my back. I was the blood wraith, the ancient anomaly forged to strip the immortal gods of their eternal life. And then through the haze of 1,000 years, I saw Vander. He was not a cruel king hunting a helpless girl. The vision pulled me into a freezing cavern a millennium ago. I watched as he plunged a jagged obsidian dagger directly into his own chest. He traded his eternal soul. He embraced a relentless curse of shadows, just to cast an impenetrable seal over my mind. He had never hunted me. He had been standing between me and the Pantheon's hounds for 1,000 years. He chose to become the monster I feared, just so I could live. The realization hit me harder than the inferno. My fear and hatred had been his only reward. He endured my terror. He suffered in absolute silence, completely alone, just to keep me breathing from afar. I reached up, my trembling fingers pressed against his scarred, burning cheek. "You foolish, beautiful man," I sobbed. A surge of unimaginable sorrow and primal power erupted from my core. The emotional explosion shattered the physical world. The blood wraith awoke. A devastating shockwave of crimson energy exploded outward. It instantly snuffed out the black flames. It swallowed the dark magic whole. The sheer force of the blast shattered the colossal iron brazier into fine dust. The air pressure in the arena dropped to a suffocating vacuum. The blast wave threw Vander backward. His protective hold on me broke as he crashed heavily into the sand. The crowd shrieked in blind terror. My aura crackled in the air like a storm of violent red lightning. Frost spread rapidly across the white sand. I was finally awake, but my chaotic awakening left a fatal opening. Theron had leaped down from the gilded balcony. He moved with the cowardly, silent precision of a striking serpent. As Vander struggled to his knees, his senses disoriented from the blast, Theron lunged from the shadows behind him. A sickening, wet sound echoed across the deathly quiet arena, metal grinding against bone. Theron drove a jagged sword, dripping with luminous, divine poison, straight through Vander's broad back. The glowing tip of the blade erupted from the center of the Dark King's chest. Pitch-black blood spilled onto the pure white frost. Chapter 6. Vander's colossal frame hit the frost-covered sand. The brutal impact drove the hilt of the glowing sword deep into his chest. Pitch-black blood spilled outward. It hissed violently against the pristine ice. "Finally," Theron sneered. He wiped a single bead of sweat from his flawless brow. He stepped carelessly over the spreading dark pool and placed a golden boot squarely on Vander's motionless shoulder. Theron looked at me. His golden eyes were wide with a manic, bottomless greed. "The seal is broken. You are the blood wraith," Theron declared. His voice echoed through the silent, frozen arena. "Submit to me, Calliope. Give me your blood, and I will let you rule the ashes as my pet." Phaedra descended gracefully to the arena floor. Her 9 crimson tails swished with malicious delight. "Such a dramatic little bird," she purred. "Come here. Be a good girl." I did not speak. I did not cry. The suffocating grief in my chest suddenly stopped bleeding. It condensed. It hardened into an impenetrable diamond of pure, unadulterated fury. The air pressure around me plummeted. A freezing vacuum stole the breath straight from the god's lungs. Thick crimson mist began to seep from my pores. It swirled around my trembling limbs. It whispered with ancient, forgotten magic. I felt the terrifying power of the Dreamweaver pulsating in my fingertips. I was no longer afraid of the shadows. I was the one who ruled them. I raised my hand. I snapped my fingers. The physical world vanished for Theron and Phaedra. I violently ripped their consciousness from their bodies. I dragged them directly into my domain. I wove a nightmare so profound, so utterly horrifying, that their physical forms froze instantly. Their arrogant smiles melted into masks of absolute terror. In their minds, I stripped them of their divine light. I cast them into a lightless pit filled with starving, unseen beasts. I made them feel every phantom bite, every tearing claw. In the real world, the result was instantaneous. Theron shrieked. He blindly swung his fists, striking Phaedra's jaw with a sickening snap. She screamed. Her nails elongated as she tore wildly at his face. They were trapped in my illusion, slaughtering one another in a frantic, bloody frenzy. "Barnaby," I commanded. My voice was layered. It carried the resonant dual tones of an ancient goddess and an apex predator. From the smoke-filled sky, the three-eyed raven descended. He led a rolling swarm of black clouds. The Lycan warriors of the abyss poured into the arena. They did not show a fraction of mercy. They crashed into the divine guards like a tidal wave of fur, steel, and fangs. The metallic scent of golden blood painted the obsidian walls. The power shift was absolute. The weak, mocked half-blood was dead. I stood tall amid the carnage, the supreme queen of the battlefield, untouchable. But as the battle raged, a weak, wet cough shattered my triumph. Vander. The divine poison was intensely anti-immortal. His rapid cellular regeneration was failing completely. The edges of his scarred skin were beginning to flake. His solid flesh was turning into gray ash, floating away on the frigid wind. His breathing was terribly shallow. His obsidian eyes, usually so fierce and commanding, were clouded, painfully distant. "Calliope," he whispered. It was a broken, fragile sound. It bypassed the ancient wrath in my blood. It tore my human heart in half. I dropped to my knees in the blood-soaked sand. The crimson aura faded instantly, replaced by a blinding, suffocating panic. I hovered my hands over his crumbling chest. I was terrified that touching him would make him disintegrate faster. "No, no, Vander, you cannot leave me," I sobbed. My tears fell freely onto his ashen cheek. "Not after 1,000 years. I forbid it." Chapter 7. I grabbed his fading hand. I pressed it fiercely against my chest. I could feel his heartbeat slowing, a sluggish, dying rhythm beneath his cold, scarred skin. "You are safe now," Vander murmured. A bloody, jagged smile touched his pale lips. "My watch is ended." "Shut up," I sobbed. My tears fell freely onto his ashen cheek. "You do not get to die. You owe me an eternity." I reached for the silver dagger at my waist. It was the very same blade he had used to claim me on the altar. Without a single second of hesitation, I dragged the razor-sharp edge across my left wrist. My blood did not flow red. It glowed with a luminous, brilliant crimson light, the pure, untainted life force of the blood wraith. I pressed my bleeding flesh against his parted lips. "Drink," I commanded. My voice echoed with ancient, resonant magic. "Drink it all." The raw magic of my blood collided with the life oath. The invisible chain binding our souls flared to life. It grew blindingly bright. A tether of pure energy connected my heart directly to his. I poured my essence, my vitality, my forgotten divinity into his collapsing veins. A violent gasp tore through Vander's throat. His eyes snapped wide open. They no longer held the clouded glaze of death. They blazed with a terrifying dual light, the pitch black of the abyss and the feral crimson of my wraith magic. The graying ash on his skin rapidly reversed. Muscle knit back together, bone fused with a deep, visceral snap. The divine poison was eradicated, purged entirely by the superior magic of my blood. He did not just heal, he evolved. The ancient curse that had bound him to the shadow shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. He sat up. His broad chest heaved. He was stronger, faster, and more imposing than he had ever been in his long existence. He looked at me. There was absolutely no hesitation. He wrapped his colossal arms around me and pulled me into a bone-crushing embrace. He buried his face in my neck, inhaling my wild scent like a starving man finally given a feast. Above us, the frozen sky trembled. The remaining gods of the Pantheon fell to their knees. The supreme rulers of the realms bowed their heads in absolute terrified submission. Theron and Phaedra, their minds permanently fractured by my illusions, were chained. They were dragged away to the deepest, lightless pits of the abyss. Weeks later, the unnatural fog parted around the dark fortress. Warm golden moonlight flooded the royal bedchamber. I lay tangled in black silk sheets. My skin was flushed, damp, with a thin sheen of sweat. Vander hovered above me. His broad shoulders blocked out the moonlight. His eyes were entirely dark, swimming with unbridled feral desire. The fake mating was over. Tonight was the true ritual. His calloused hand slowly traced the curve of my hip. The touch sent a violent shiver cascading down my spine. The heat between us was a physical, suffocating force. "Are you ready, my queen?" he asked. His voice was a low, raspy purr. It vibrated deep against my collarbone. "Mark me," I whispered. I arched my back, exposing the pale, unblemished skin of my throat. I threaded my fingers through his dark hair, pulling him closer. "Make me yours." With a guttural growl of pure possession, his fangs descended. He sank them deep into the crook of my neck. The sharp sting of pain instantly gave way to intense, blinding euphoria. Our souls merged entirely. We were two ancient broken halves forging a perfect, indestructible whole. Outside the thick oak doors, perched on a stone gargoyle, Barnaby rolled his 3 amber eyes. "Honestly," the raven muttered to himself. He used his sharp beak to polish a solid gold crown he had pried from Theron's disgraced head. A whole week of this noise, the sexual tension finally broke, and now I cannot get a single moment of peace. Disgusting. He snapped his beak shut. He tucked the stolen gold safely under his wing and settled in for the night. The abyss was finally at peace. It was ruled by a king of shadows and his queen of blood. Thank you for journeying into the shadows with us and witnessing the unbreakable bond of Vander and Calliope. If their tale of dark romance and fated destiny captured your heart, surrender entirely to the Velmora obsession. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment to let us know your favorite moment, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next epic romance. Until next time, let the shadows keep you safe.